G'day. So my name's Sandro. I'm the CEO of Big Health. I'd just like to also start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land we're on here today. The Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation and their elders past, present and emerging. As mentioned, as the oldest continuous culture in the world, with a deep connection to land and food, I think we need to bring a level of humility to this conversation, that we have still so much to learn from First Nations communities and so much more work to do to empower and support First Nations communities across our state when it comes to nutrition. So I'm going to talk a little bit, I feel as though my talk's kind of already been given, that it is the contextual and transactional for me and Al. I'm very passionate about this topic, so I do set myself an alarm because I have been known to talk for hours. There we go, done, 15 minutes on the clock. And I want to talk a little bit about what the context is, some work around what we're doing, acknowledging that I have people in the room who are actually doing the work. So including one that's walked in. I'll just take credit today for the work. And then some reflections on sort of where to from here and some things that I think we need to think deeply about as a sector and as a group. So if we think about our challenge, this is new data from 2022 from FAO, looking at how we're tracking in terms of our global nutrition targets. And it won't surprise anyone that the targets that we set out to achieve across early childhood, and particularly for women and girls, we're not on track to achieve. In fact, in many of the instances, we're going backwards, but most, at least, we're not on track. So whether it's stunting, unrelenting hunger for the first years of life, leading to lifelong impairment across intellectual, physical, and of course, economic returns, whether it's acute hunger, anemia, wasting anemia, overweight, or adult obesity. So the picture's not good. And this is a very famous picture, but I think it's as relevant today as it's ever been. Of course, it's a piece of art, which in itself is interesting to reflect on, but our food environments have kind of become almost a caricature of themselves. And if you kind of blur your eyes, I don't think, sadly, that this is very far from the picture that we would see in many of the supermarket environments familiar to us in our local neighbourhoods and across the state. So food has become, you know all of this, but food has become commodified. It's become something we trade and sell. It's something that we make money on, every quarter for our shareholders. And it's something, therefore, that has been pulled into our capitalist, sort of largely exploitative economic model that really is about trying to extract as much profit at any result. And so often, and what we're seeing is, really largely an exploitative system, one that exploits the natural environment, one that exploits much of society for the benefit of few, and one that exploits future generations. That might sound controversial, particularly coming from a government agency in the middle of caretaker, but unfortunately, it's just fact. The other piece that I think is really important is to remind ourselves that this is not a kind of high-income, low-income issue. So if we look to this is the State of the World's Children's Report, which I was a co-author for in 2019. And if you look particularly at the far right, this is the one that kind of, for a lot of people, they find surprising. So it's fast food intake across income level among children. And what you see is that really the percentage, so this is adolescent food diets, whether they're living in high income countries like ours, or whether they're living in low income countries across the world, and everything in between, the dominance of westernized, commodified, and ultra processed diets is universal. This is not a situation, as we saw for many decades, of eating of hunger as you wait to become to enter an environment of abundance and eventually chronic disease. That kind of nutrition transition is now far more complex, and in fact, in many places, including low-income countries, the food environment is increasingly resembling that of Australia and high-income nations. Of course, the other challenge is, this convergence of crises that are happening across the planet. And we're coming out of 2 or 3 years of significant interruption and disruption from the pandemic, which has really accelerated many of the worrying trajectories that we were on in terms of divergence, inequity. It's shown the fragility and yet the interdependence of our modern economy and food systems. But it's also shown that really our food, overall our food system has probably stood up quite well, but that there are some major blind spots that have come, very much come home to roost. Alongside the health challenge, we now have an ecological challenge. So we have droughts in China. We have severe, if not the worst, droughts in the Horn of Africa in history. We have floods across, much of Europe last winter and across Australia now. So these extremes are becoming more and more common, and they're overlaying and interrupting our food system, including availability of arable land for production. The economic challenges continue. I mean, the food prices have spiked following Ukraine. That's affecting food prices, even the ability for the World Food Programme to buy grain to feed the ongoing catastrophic levels of food insecurity in the Horn of Africa, as I mentioned, the Middle East and parts of sub-Saharan Africa. But interestingly, we were having a conversation just the other day that the change in crude oil price as a result of Russia's invasion of Ukraine has influenced the cost of crude oil and the comparative cost between crude oil and biofuel in Indonesia. What does that mean? It means that biofuel is now cheaper than crude oil, therefore more land is being used in Indonesia to grow fuel rather than food, leading to an increase in food insecurity in Indonesia as a result of Ukraine, but not actually linked at all to the fact that we can't get grain out of the region. So it just shows the interlinked nature, and finally, of course, geopolitical. All of the major food insecurity events, many of them over the last 5 decades, have been directly related to geopolitical instability, and most of them increasingly come down to 2 factors: climate change and war. Here at home, this is data from our friend Christina and Catherine, and of course Anna's team. And again, this shows over a 2-year period, 2018 to 2020, changes in food prices and how it's playing out here in Australia as well. So we know that we had, off the back of droughts, unprecedented fires. That led us straight into the disruption of the pandemic. And then, of course, we've had floods. And the latest ABS data, the numbers are quite significant. So fruit and vegetable prices rose 16% in 12 months to September 2022. And you think about the pressure that that's putting on home budgets in the context of the wider economic challenges, the concern, as well as the very real pressures on home budgets with both inflation and also interest rate changes. But of course, also the quality of diets, not just the quantity of food that people can buy, but the shift in the quality of diets. And how that will change some of the recent trends that we've seen, around real and deep conversations around, things like food traceability, sustainability, and even the increasing focus for some on, organic as a priority. We are now seeing some of these trends either chill or reverse in most high-income markets around the world, including Europe, including the US, and here in Australia. So what are we doing? And I really want to be kind of very clear that I don't come to this conversation as an expert with all of the solutions. Clearly, the problems are getting worse. I think we have to be humble that we don't actually have the solutions. We're trying a number of things with the tools and privilege that we have as an agency, but we're also acknowledging that there is a level of uncertainty and that some of the things we are trying might lead to learnings and iteration. So the first is our place-based investments through local government. So this is a very different way of us working as Vic Health. This came out of a very frank conversation with the CEO of Mildura City Council when I was about 3 weeks into the job, who really gave me a very, shall I say, it was a very frank conversation. And I always say, feedback, particularly critical feedback, is the highest form of compliment. It shows people care. If they don't care, they're not going to give you feedback. So they were very critical of the way that we had worked as an agency and the wider government approach. That we didn't realise there was a Victoria beyond Bendigo, fair enough. That our priorities changed every 3 months. I mean, probably every year, but yes, that's probably true. And that while we worked with lots of amazing organisations, we left each individual council to have multiple contracts with multiple organisations that we fund. So how can we make that easier for them? So what we came up with was the Vic Health Local Government Partnership. And the proof really is in the pudding. It's only 2 years in, but we've just had another 13 councils apply. So as of a few months' time, we will be working in active partnership with half the state's councils, 36 councils across the state out of 79. And that's been all demand driven. And we really kind of rally different resources around the councils, focused on systems change for the health and wellbeing of young people, leveraging their health and wellbeing plan, so their municipal plan. So it's a 5-year partnership, not 1 or 2. We commit for 5 years. We give them an outer 3 if they don't like us, though, that's fine. We build in systems mapping through Deacon, so it's all based on complex dynamic systems maps. We help them to prioritise what works and is important for them. We wrap around evidence-based modules, including critical skills in co-design with young people so that they can do it safely, and also in systems leadership and then health promotion. Then there are a series of modules, the community of practice, so they can actually work and learn from one another, because very often we're not the experts in the room. They have all the solutions, but they don't have necessarily the how to implement or the how to scale. And then we also provide a level of FTE funding. So for us, this is a very different way. We plug in then our partnership, the partners like QUIT or ADF, or indeed some of our food partners. We plug those in through our contract. We pay them, but we take care of as much as possible. It's a single point of entry for our councils. You have to remember we're talking about, below, for example, that might have 7 people working in the council. Very different from some of the big inner city councils, although we increasingly are working with many of them as well. The second sort of disruptive example I wanted to give was a fantastic program that Deepa brought to Vic Health. And so the idea really was, how can we work with the startup community to bring new market-led solutions to address some of the biggest challenges facing young people when it comes to their health and nutrition. So we went out alongside our government partner, Launch Vic, which is the Victorian government's accelerator agency, startup and accelerator agency. And we ran Australia's first health promotion accelerator. It was a program for, I think, 15 or 13, is that right? 13 startups that were, ideas. We gave them business support, rapid kind of prototyping and iteration, connected them to each other, and then 2 of them got some funding to move forward with, to the next stage with their concepts. We also invite them into our space to work alongside our staff and learn and co-create along the way. The 2 issues were, how do we increase access to affordable, fresh, healthy food for young people? $1 million question that, quite frankly, we don't have the answer to. And the second was, in the absence of, while Jane is going to continue to beat the drum, and rightly so, and we want to support and work alongside her to do that, to protect young people from digital marketing, what disruptive technology solutions could startups come up with that might also provide ways of getting to that endpoint in the meantime? Of course, the third example is kind of a partnership that we're really proud of, and is a huge group effort across the sector. So I don't know if you've seen the show. It's okay if you haven't. It's on iView. But for us, this really was kind of a new way of doing health promotion. So, the days of putting up a billboard or telling people to do this, that, or the other, they're still really critically important tools in the health promotion shed. But we wanted to try and find a new way, not only to take the message out in a form that would cut through with a great platform that reaches millions of Australians, but also a way to work with incredible people and give our partners a platform too. So we've been talking about a kind of war on waste style show with ABC for about 4 years. It took a long time to get to pre-production. We're able to engage with ABC very early on when it was just an idea and help them to connect to lots of great partners and organisations. You know, they call them talents, but they're basically bloody gems like Jane. And then build this 3-part documentary series, which was built ultimately by a really clever production company, Southern Pictures. And then, of course, our team continued to work with them on all of the fact-checking and then all of the impact elements across all of the ABC channels as well. And that's been a really incredible journey for the team. It's been an amazing way to work with the sector and to strengthen, I think, the sector more broadly. And we're starting to see some amazing results, not just 750,000 people watching it and winning the time slot on television for the last 3 weeks running, but, you know, early signs of impact as well, which has been really great. And then the 4th example I wanted to tell you about is a new program that we're launching with Monash University using Minecraft. So this is really looking at the younger age group. We know young kids are online, exploring, building worlds on Minecraft. So why not get them to build a world that is, you know, a healthy world through their eyes? What does it look like? It's kind of the Steve Allender systems mapping for 5-year-olds, and it's amazing. So this will be launching really soon. It's going to be a Minecraft challenge, but you know we challenge them to kind of build a world, as I say, a health promoting world through the eyes of young people. They've even created this really cringy avatar of me, which I'm absolutely horrified by. That's not me there. Yeah, it's really fun. And again, it's about how do we disrupt? How do we do things differently? How do we have these conversations in a different way? How do we meet communities, individuals, young people actually where they're at, and empower them to design it through their eyes and through that build agency. So some very quick takeaways where to from here. The first is really, I mean, you know, Anna's a world leader in this. I'm not going to stand up and pretend that I am, but I absolutely wholeheartedly believe that we need to continue this shift towards thinking in systems. It's not the individual telling the individual to eat the apple. You know, it's fundamentally calling out issues of power, privilege, inequity, and injustice in the system, and what that means for the eventual outcome of what people can afford, what barriers they face, and who's left out of the food system. So we've been doing some work to try and make sure that we ourselves work as a system first and foremost. Big help that we actually talk with each other, that we include and co-design across the agency, and that we're really unlocking the power of, you know, the multiple pieces working together. I think then there's obviously the food sector, all of us, and then there's the system around the individual. And I think there is quite a way to go in thinking about how do we work more effectively as a food sector. How do we make sure that the conversations aren't siloed? I remember working at, I think it's the next slide. I'm now really rushing to try and. I remember when I worked at WHO and I was given the task of designing and launching the UN Decade of Action on Nutrition. And it became really clear to me very quickly that the hunger world and the obesity world didn't talk to each other, let alone then the nutrition world with the climate, the wider ag, you know, the people actually grow the food or are kind of focused on that, and in the health world. So even within the nutrition world, those two didn't talk to each other. And I remember very clearly holding one of the early combined meetings, and I said to the obesity people, you know, why do you think this is the case? And they said, oh, Sandro, hunger is really simple, but obesity is really complex. And then I turned to the hunger people, and you know what they said to me? Obesity is really simple, but hunger is really complex. So how are we kind of breaking down, you know, more of these barriers? How are we thinking? I mean, it's so clear the connections to us when you take a step back of what's going on in our food system, how that's connected to the social justice movement, how that's connected to issues around gender and gender inequality. You know, 9/10 of the people on the planet who have fallen into hunger over the last 12 months are women and girls. There is a huge gender gap when it comes to growing global nutrition and hunger, and I would imagine it's the same here in Australia. So how are we kind of connecting these? How are we making sure that the voices are converging just as the issues converge? I do think that we need to continue, as we will do, to take risks, to be bold, and to do things differently, to be humble that we actually don't have the solutions, that many of the challenges, the curve is going in the wrong direction. Let's not be disheartened by that. Let's just acknowledge it, you know, find new ways, new partners, be a bit more humble and move forward. And my last is a bit more controversial, but you asked me to give a challenge. So my last challenge, I think, is really, it's a hard one because I see how destructive the modern, commodified, commercialised and westernised food system is being to the planet and to human health. At the same point, I don't want to be in the same place in 20 or 30 years because the power imbalance between players in the food space is just, it's so enormous. And so I think we need to be really careful about how we engage, and I certainly don't think we should engage with any of the ones up there, but I do think we need a more nuanced conversation about the private sector, remembering that people who grow our food, you know, mums and dads and small, you know, family farmers, they are part of the private sector. That there are, you know, food providers who don't have the same interests as food manufacturers. But the food retailers you're all working with, even in that group, there are big ones, there's small ones, some that are invested in the wrong things, some that are maybe slightly easier to work with. And then where across the policy or programmatic chain do we decide to work? Totally agree, very fraught when we're trying to develop solutions, they need to be kept outside. But if we're trying to implement in a vacuum, you know, how much do we be purists versus pragmatists? And I don't have the answers. They are fraught and difficult. We tried to, I spent 8 years building the EAT Foundation and continue to work with them closely, trying to create a safe space for these conversations to occur. And it just strikes me that these conversations, they could be happening, I think, more in Australia. But to do that, we need to be very clear on where the lines are, what the risks are, and what we're trying to achieve. So I'll leave that with you. I don't have an answer, it's just a thought. Thank you.
Right. Why join Sandro on stage with our three other guests? I'd like you to talk to the person next to you just for a few minutes. What's one thing that struck you about Sandro's presentation? Just with someone next to you. For a couple of minutes.
Oh, I've got my lungs out.
Anyway, it doesn't matter about the water. Okay, so we're part of the system, even though we're up here on an elevated little tiny stage. We're about to have what I call a generative conversation where we build on each other's thoughts and ideas. And the whole idea of a dialogue interview panel like this is to give you an opportunity to step out of your own perspective and step into the shoes of our four panelists here and to see the system and their work through their eyes as much as possible. Now, this is one of the subtle arts of a lot of the work that Sandro was talking about. If we're going to engage with the private sector, there's a lot of letting go we have to do as we step into that conversation. Yeah? We've got to enter it with an open heart and an open mind and with an open will. And for anyone that's done Otto Scharmer's theory U stuff, you'll know what I'm talking about. So to start with, I'm going to start with Tara, who's sitting to my right. There's a chance for Tara, then Margaret, and then Dani to introduce themselves and reflect on one thing they heard from Sandro's presentation that stood out for them above everything else. Tara, your intro. Who are you, where are you from, and what stood out?
Thanks. Well, I feel a bit bad for myself having to go directly after Sandra, but I'll keep it short. So I'm Tara. I'm a public health researcher at Deakin University, and I specialise in healthy food retail. And I'm really interested in understanding how we can actually implement healthy food retail on the ground with community retailers, so health service providers, sport and rec organisations, and local governments. So that's a bit about me, and kind of reflecting on some of Sandro's comments. What came through to me really strongly was two things that I think are related. Firstly, the cost of living and economic crisis that's occurring around the world and in Australia. And secondly, this idea of working with industry and approaching that conversation with nuance. And I've been working in the space for about 8 years or so. And what struck me when I first started and now is that inevitable tension between nutrition and business. You can see that all the way from these really big multi-conglomerates all the way down to the retailers that I work with, these kind of community retailers. And that contrast and that kind of tension has just been exacerbated by the cost of living and all these really large scale things that we see happening in the world. So I have been interested, and I'm still really interested in how we approach those tensions and how we create win-win-wins, wins for health, wins for retailers, and wins for consumers.
Right. Thank you, Tara. Margaret, over to you.
Hi everyone, I'm Margaret. I'm from Nutrition Australia, and I manage the Hot Eating Advisory Service, which is a government-funded advisory service. We support publicly funded settings, pretty much like hospitals and health service, the retail there, sport rec facilities, childcare centres, and schools and their canteens to implement government policies and guidelines. We are about creating healthier food environments, so much individuals. So that's some vantage point that I come from. What stood out to me today, everything that Tara said, but that just listening to your point around the CEO, that gave you feedback, I'm not sure you are. But, I think we all need to be willing, we can't keep doing everything the way we've been doing now. It's not working. So we really need to be open to getting some feedback from the community. And I think even Jeff, once you said, if you don't ask, you're not going to receive the answers. So we just really need to go out with what needs to change. And I liked that example that we gave around Victorian local government partnership, because prevention and health promotion, the resources are so limited. I mean, we're calling for 5%, not much. People are sitting at 2% and 3%. So I think we really need to think about how we're going to use our limited resources across Victoria to get, so we can synergise what we're doing rather than all working individually in silos. How to make it easier to get progress in this space.
That's true, Margaret. And I think building on what you said before too, it's like that's conversation you have with the CEO. We need to get much better at getting that type of criticism and different perspective and letting our own darlings go. It's a term Adam Kahane uses, someone I work with a lot. We've got to learn to let our darlings go. The things that we think are really important and working and all that sort of stuff, maybe they're not. If we're working with that group over there, they might not care about our thing. What does that mean? And how can we be more open in that space? I think that's really, really important. Yeah.
Hi, my name's Dani Valent. I am a food journalist. I'm the restaurant critic for the Sunday Age. I've got a couple of food podcasts, one called Dirty Linen, which talks about issues in hospitality, and the other one is called Producers. And on that one, me and my co-presenter talk to farmers and people who are making food products. I love my work. I also do lots of events. If I try to think an umbrella term for what I do. I say leading people to great food experiences. So that's through journalism, podcasts, events. I think the thing that I loved your talk makes me feel good about paying taxes. I think what's really stood out for me is when you said we're here in the food world, because we also, I mean, I'm off to the side of hospitality, but I would actually say that people that I talk to think that they are the food world. But it's so interesting because I would say out of everybody here, I really barely know anybody. I feel like you all know each other and you know one another's worlds. So that's so interesting. Like if you're the food world, who am I? But I think that's really telling.
Yeah. And I think that gets to your point, Sandro, about, you know, we need a better appreciation of the system and the bigger, wider system around what we do. We are stuck in our silos and mindsets, aren't we? So
yeah, I think also not criticizing or feeling guilty, because I also was at a conversation recently where there was a social enterprise group and they were kind of going through this existential reflection of, you know, we exactly the same thing. We thought we were the food system. It's like, guys, there are so many more parts of the food system out there and people that you could be working with. And it wasn't a criticism because it was, you're doing amazing stuff. You know, share it and connect, and don't see it as zero sum. If you connect and someone else gets some success, don't see that as like something you've given up. See that as like a strength that you've shared.
So the next part of the interview goes to this kind of looking in the rearview mirror and what's come before us. And part of this is celebrating Nourish. For the people here on the panel that understand Nourish, will hear a little bit about what's worked really well with the Nourish Network in the past. But this is also about lessons from our work. Right? What are those biggest lessons? And you've already shared a few, but add to them, please, Sandro. Tara, firstly, my question to you is, in what ways has the Nourish Network in the last few years changed the way you conduct research?
Yeah, so I feel very lucky to have been part of Nourish since its inception about 3 years ago. And for me, the most exciting thing about Nourish Network is that it's created this space where myself as a researcher, maybe in an ivory tower sometimes, can talk directly to public health practitioners, to retailers, and really have an open dialogue about where the problems are, what they are, and how we can work together to address them. And so I think that the Nourish Network has really changed the way that I approach healthy food retail, not as a researcher, but trying to think about it deeply from the perspective of others and involving them in the process of solving those problems and not trying to.
So rather than working from outside looking in, you're in there with them having the conversation.
And letting them be a part of the solution.
Yeah. And what in all of that work has been like one standout lesson you've learned? Like what's one thing you've realised that you've come to that you think is really important to carry forward, you know, even as things change?
So I would say that the processes we've been through, you know, we can co-design, co-creation, it's really hard, honestly, because you have to take a step out of your own perspective and you have to acknowledge that there are tensions and that people are coming at it from different angles. But it's totally worth it because you're coming up with solutions that are generated by the people who will actually be using them. And I think we need to think more about how we can kind of streamline those processes, incorporating different people's perspectives. So that's what I say. I think it's hard work, but it's worth it.
Good. And Margaret's conveniently seated next because you've got a bit more to say about that kind of co-design piece as well, and your lessons and why you think it's important. Like what's really come out from it.
Yeah, so Tara and I are in the same group, and about 3 years ago we came to an event like this, and I stood next to one of these whiteboards. Wouldn't it be great if we created some, you know, resources for retailers, you know, dedicated to retailers? A lot of the work that we do starts working with organisations, so we've had a lot of conversations when COVID hit. So a lot of these conversations were online, and so I think what we've realised is it is hard because it's not very efficient. We're also focused on being efficient and chopping out things and getting them looking great and things did slow down because we actually did take the time, and we had a great opportunity in that we got some funding to do a bit of research to test some resources, and we got some feedback from actual retailers, which was great. But then you have to go again. People are doing. Then it's there's so many different iterations you've got to be really patient. But I think the lesson there is allow a lot of time. Make sure you've got the right people in the room, because I think we still don't have the right people in the room. You actually have to go to people that they're not going to come to you. We always think you actually have to go to the retailer and knock on their door. And it's not everyone's got the time, especially retailers. They're very sort of time poor. They're focused on their business. So I think that we still need to get better at doing it, but it's not until you actually do it that you learn it.
Yeah, yeah. But you've got to make the space and time for it to happen.
Oh yeah.
And be okay with the frustration, but feeling like it's going slowly.
Yeah.
Because when you pull it together, it can then go quite fast. Yeah.
Potentially, yeah. And look, different challenges come your way. We had COVID and lockdown, impacting access to the people that we want to co-design with. So yeah, I think the big lesson is allow time. You need to keep the rest.
And before we move to Dani, the biggest thing you like to celebrate about Nourish Network so far, because that's part of the purpose of today, like your experience in Nourish Network. What's the thing that you think we really need to just take a pause and acknowledge today?
So the project that Margaret and I worked on was co-designing this retailer toolkit. So for and by retailers, really focused on what the retailer needs to shift to healthier food provision, thinking about what do they need from a business perspective, from a customer's perspective, incorporating case studies, how-tos, troubleshooting, and that is going to be released in the near future and is going to be distributed, to all health services in Victoria. And it's also going to be adapted by Health and Health Queensland and being used in Queensland Health Services. So I think what's exciting is that we've put all of this hard work in, and I think it's going to have exponential benefit. So Victorian health services and retailers are going to benefit from that, as are health services and retailers in Queensland. So it's really exciting to see that work being valued by other organisations, and that reach is, we didn't plan for that to happen when we started a few years ago, but we can really see other people starting to value that as well.
If you want to find out more about that, come and see Tara. Dani, over to you. You've probably learned a lot, and you've already said that you kind of like from maybe a different part of the food system for a lot of people here. When you think about your work, which is multi and varied and quite different to what we're used to dealing with, writing and in the media and that sort of thing, what have been your big lessons in this space? What would you like to share with us?
Around health?
Yeah, around health.
I would say, I talk to people that work in my bit of the food world all the time, and I never hear anybody talk about health. It's just not a conversation. They are talking about staffing, about cost of good, about telling their own story through food. So when I hear nourish, I suppose I think about, of course, like physical nourishment, but I feel like it makes me think more about the other jobs that hospitality does, which is around nourishing connection, around telling stories, around creating a forum where people can nourish themselves as a community or as a family or as a group of friends. It's much less about like trans fats and whatever. So, I suppose what I have learned about Nourish Network is that it exists, and that there are all you smart people who are thinking about this world of food retail, which I've also never heard called food retail, where it has that meaning. So I think there are all these sort of really interesting language issues where we perhaps don't connect. I feel like there must be so many more meeting places, because of course, everybody believes in health and healthier communities with the abstract, but what it actually means when, as you say, like people are so busy, their businesses are just like an endless struggle. Just like, the parent who's driving the kids home from swimming and, just quickly nips through Macca's because it's easier than thinking about the fridge. These retailers are just thinking about, getting through this week of business and hopefully having a tiny bit of profit left over. So I think there's just, I don't know what this toolkit is, but I think everything can be toolkits that are really practical. And that sounds like an amazing starting place to change.
Yeah, that's terrific. And I think it's a research project for a linguist, just on all the different terms, isn't there? So we can find something in the middle, or stick with the terms, but at least come together in these spaces. And the other thing I picked from what you said is Nourish is more about, this is the nice thing about the name Nourish Network. One thing we know about systems transformation, Margaret Wheatley uses the same word, where she says we need to nourish and connect up all the communities of practice out there around the system. So it is about nourishing people, nourishing connections and relationships between people and organisations, and it's also about the nourishment we get from our food. So I think we can take nourish to mean a lot of things. So that's terrific. What about you, Sandro? You presented 4 projects. They were the kids one on Minecraft, which I'll have to tell one of my boys about. The Magda's big national health check. We watched that with the kids. They had 2 boys at home last night, and I said, I'm interviewing that guy. the civic lags and the local government partnership. Of all those, which is the one you'd like to call out? What's the big lesson?
Oh, I'm not going to choose between my 2. Okay.
All right.
Some of the people
let your darlings go.
No, I think for me, there are many amazing lessons, but the power of lived experience and of centering that. So systems change is complex, and it's very hard to communicate. And politicians' eyes glaze over at best. At worst, they say, "Why are you doing that when you're the health promotion agency?" Or "Why are you doing that when you're a researcher?" Or the health media advisory service. I'm sure you guys hear this all the time because actually to fundamentally shift the system, you have to work in a way that is disseminated, it's messy, it's multifactorial, and also it's a long time scale. There is no single silver bullet, and sometimes you're pulling levers outside of your, the space that people would say you should be working in. And I think that's where the power of lived experience can be so incredible, and that's really something that is a thread across all 4 projects. So listening to their CEO, what does it mean from their perspective to deliver a project that is effective and respectful and accountable and responsive? What does it look like through the eyes of kids to redesign our system through Minecraft? And I think really the kind of groundbreaking, a lot of the stuff in Magda's show, and she will acknowledge this, a lot of the stuff that is stuff that we've been saying for a long time. The difference is that Magda's saying it. And she's a national icon. She's saying it with heart and empathy and curiosity. And she is saying it in a way that's non-judgmental. And we have a laugh along the way. So everyone lets their guard. Everyone goes, "Oh, thank God it's not that weedy tall guy with glasses and long hair telling me what to do again. It's Magda. I'll listen to this." And we can go so much further, faster. And I think we're seeing that. We're seeing conversations happen that we've been wanting to happen. I don't think it's going to, not trying to pretend that everything's solved and we'll go home, but I think the power of her personal narrative and opening that up to the nation is the kind of transformative element, I think, of the show.
And what on earth is Vikos doing working in the media with Magda?
I know.
Come on.
Well, my board member's here, so you can ask them.
So I'll move this way down the line now. So still with you, Sandra. Future success. Imagine it's 2026 or 2028, sometime not too distant in the future. Yeah. And the work of the Nourish Network and other people in the different food systems, it's turned out well, Based on what you know of what the Nourish Network does, what's your greatest hopes for what could happen? Like, if we were to parachute into 2026 and things have turned out really well, what would you see happen as a result of the work of networks like Nourish?
Well, fundamentally that, we have delivered, a kind of sustainable, respectful, inclusive food system that doesn't exploit most of the cost, the profit of the few, and you know, that you know, with deep reflection and some different actions along the way to get us there. But I think at the back end, what Dani's saying, I mean, let's connect the dots on our side, even if we just get there and we're a stronger, more unified sector who knows what we want, you know, is working with farmers and, you know, and innovators and entrepreneurs, as well as experts in the, you know, in government, in academia, finding ways to move at pace and scale that we're comfortable with, that's respectful to communities and to our own values, but that is that balance between purism and pragmatism. Like, it is, what is going on in the world at the moment is really bloody scary. So if we're just alive in 2028, that'll be a good start. The way that the world seems to be going at the moment, not to be like a total downer. You know, but like, yeah, I mean, I think we need to start doing things differently, move a bit faster, bridge the gaps, find catalytic opportunities.
Yeah, no, terrific. Great. Dani, what about you? We've been successful in all of our work. You to parachute in and see the way the system's working and who's working with who and what's happening. What does it look like?
I'd say it's a much more creative space.
Yep.
And I'll probably point to a couple of things that feel relevant to me that I've seen recently in restaurants and cafes. So one, I was chatting to a pub owner in regional area. He was talking about how he had tried to mitigate his staffing crisis. So no one's got enough staff in hospitality. So one of the things that they do is have fewer touch points on plates. So that means that there didn't have as many people building these dishes and sending them out. So what he had taken to do to solve part of his staffing problem was to, instead of having a little side salad with a palm, he would just put a bowl of salad in the middle of the table. Now, what usually happens when you've got, you know, your palm, you've got your chips and you've got your salad, is that, you know, 80% of the salads just get pushed to the side. They're just like this decoration, and then you concentrate on the palming, then you chip it all and just push it away. But what he found by just serving salad in the middle of the table, not only did it make fewer touches on each plate, so simpler from a workforce point of view, but more salad was getting eaten. So the people that wanted the salad would take it, and they would refill the bowls as well. So there was no shortage of salad, more was being eaten. So I don't know, you guys are the research.
I mean, that's something stumbled upon by accident, largely, isn't it? Possibly an unintended consequence.
Yeah.
But there's a prototype right there. There's something to try out. Now, as a metaphor in your work, folks, this idea of prototyping and trying stuff out and learning as you go, and maybe pushing beyond the normal kind of remit that you have, that's really important way of working in this world, right? We've got to get much better at trying stuff out, improvising, doing this over here, which may not work. And even if it doesn't work, we'll learn more about the system. Yeah, this is the thing about prototyping. You try things out, and your failures, you'll learn probably more from them than you do your successes. Now, that's scary because no one wants to fail or get things wrong. Yeah, and we're tied to KPIs and project outcomes and things like that. Well, we're going to start pushing back on some of that as well, I think. Yeah.
Can we give you one more?
Please.
So the other one, so staffing is a major issue for Costco. The other one is costs. So one thing that most kitchens are doing is trying to make more of what they bring in through the door. So that means reducing food waste, using food waste in creative ways. So there's this awesome new cafe in Kensington. You should all go there. It's called Cassette. It's actually, could be relevant for you guys with systems, because it's at the base of a 7-story apartment building that's designed to relieve the housing crisis. These apartments are mostly offered on a rent-to-buy basis. There is a building-wide composter, there's shed laundry, there's a dog washing station, there's a library. Basically, it's a community. It's net zero power. That's really creative space. So the cafe at the base naturally is also creative and is working on a zero food waste model. So, for example, some of the things that they do, milk that's about to turn, they turn into yogurt and use it as part of the menu. The the whey that's created as part of that yogurt process they're using to make a delicious soda. Busy drink, but it's okay. Yeah, the coffee, like when you turn on the coffee machine in the morning or the grinder, you just need to calibrate it every day. So there's usually like a big fistful of coffee grounds that's normally wasted. You're actually burying eggs in those, and when you crack them and make a fried egg, they have this beautiful fragrance and a slight coffee flavour. So amazing for your morning caffeination situation. All the peelings and carrot tops and scraps get turned into a vegetable powder, which is then used to flavour other dishes.
Just Google cassette already.
Like cassette tape. Like, it's actually my review in the Sunday Age this weekend, not a plug, but.
Oh, I love it. I love it.
I think, and the thing about a lot of the food ends up being fermented, so they're making lots of pickles, and they're all up there as a sort of showcase, but also this is where they keep them. And I think one of the things we need to think about, I reckon, if you ever think about food in relation to health, is it's got to be so tasty. So when food's fermented, it's really tasty. It's very helpful, gut health, low food waste, better for the bottom line. So it's kind of just like has all the wins, but it also introduces people to new flavors. And I think when you talk about eating healthy, it's about a lot of time about variety. So I think being not scared of new flavors. Right.
Great. Awesome. Sandro, your links to ABC iView, I think we need a Australian story or something on that. Margaret, it's turned out well in the future. What's one thing you would say?
4 years' time, I'm really excited that most of the Healthy Choices policy directive for hospitals and health services, and all 81, and most of them have removed their sugar. It doesn't apply to commercial, but in 4 years' time, I really would love to see that all the 81 hospitals and health services have a healthy offering. They meet the policy directive healthy choices guidelines, but more often than that, it's become normal. Everyone expects it. You know, at the moment, it just seems such a big shift. So it's actually created a cultural shift, and so people are actually outraged when they see Coke in the drinks fridge when they go to the retailer. That's what I'd like to see in 4 years' time, and the same goes for other cities that we work with. Full canteen, because it's kind of like being normalised. A lot of these discretionary foods like that.
And it becomes invisible eventually.
Yeah.
It just becomes the way things are done. Tara.
Am I allowed to have two? So firstly, just reflecting on something that Dani said earlier, that we know where those other meeting places are, where the food people are, and that we're invited there, and that we have lots of touch points with them and them with us.
I think it's a cassette.
Yeah.
This Sunday with the
And the second one is that we kind of normalize the approach of co-design, where we're, no tool or resources or approach is kind of developed without the involvement in some point of the end user who's going, who that's targeted to.
Right. So, on that note, to keep things moving, Anna, we're going to quietly, and Victoria, we're going to change the way the agenda works. The break is now going to happen now.